Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Do you ever ask yourself what that underlying feeling is when you have that thought that the UK Fire and Rescue Service, which was once at the pinnacle and sought after in terms of firefighting techniques, procedures, practices, and operational readiness, now feels like it's somewhat lagging behind? As part of the podcast work, we obviously have guests on from all over the world, and I regularly find myself connecting the dots with things that are taught in the UK Fire and Rescue Service, but not as they were intended. Well, if you ever feel this way, know that you are not alone. And many firefighters at various levels and organisations, especially in our training departments in the UK, feel very much the same. And a lot of people are trying to change that. Tactical Firefighting UK is an informal group recently set up hoping to link every UK Fire and Rescue Service together and allow for collaboration and knowledge sharing through individuals responsible for BA training delivery. We come across a lot of really crucial pieces of information and insight for those that have an appetite to delve a little bit deeper into tactical firefighting, fire behaviour, ventilation, and effectively physics in general, how the world works and how fire behaves in these different situations with these different materials. One example of the great things that we find is this B-SAHF model. It's an internationally recognised method for reading the fire, adopted by some fire services, but not specifically any in the UK. Within the group of Tactical Firefighting UK, there is a whole host of BA specialists, trainers, researchers, and subject matter experts from across the UK. And we regularly discuss many of these models, many different training techniques, and share really crucial, insightful information with each other. So today on the podcast, my guests are Lewis White and Dave Berry. Both these individuals are operational watch managers, watch commanders in the UK Fire and Rescue Service, and they also lead on breathing apparatus training in their respective services and brigades. So the conversation today is going to delve into the evolution and importance of tactical firefighting in the UK, focusing on the collaborative efforts among firefighters to enhance training and situational awareness. The subject of today's conversation is going to be B-SAHF model, which serves as a mnemonic for situational awareness and explore various aspects of firefighting, including significance of networking, the role of breathing apparatus, and the dynamics of heat and flame, as well as its interaction with the environment and the ventilation profile of the properties, premises, and locations that we visit in those moments of crisis to deliver a life-saving service. This discussion really emphasises the need for continuous learning and adaptation in firefighting practices to improve safety and effectiveness. So there's some big key takeaways today, such as the collaboration effort of tactical firefighting in the UK, the B-SAHF model and its enhancement for situational awareness, understanding environmental factors as a key to effective firefighting, smoke and how it serves as a precursor to fire and should be treated with caution, controlling the flow paths and its essential need for us to have an awareness of this and how to interact with it for the safety of firefighters, thermal imaging and its valuable tool for assessing fire conditions, heat release rates and the critical factor this plays in the fire's dynamics, firefighters' willingness and awareness to adapt and change the materials and their combustion properties that we find in the fires that we go to on a day-to-day basis, and how that eternal student mindset and continuous learning is vital for improving every single firefighter's operational techniques. So it's a pleasure to have Dave and Lewis on the podcast today. I hope you take a lot away from it. Our hope is that you, really enjoy it, share it with people. If you do learn something from it, don't be selfish. Send it to somebody else. Drop it in the WhatsApp group. Ping it on the email. And our hope is we're going to have many more like this. We'll have some different members, perhaps from the Tactical Firefighting UK group, come on and discuss different elements, different models, different teaching techniques that perhaps you will also find useful when developing yourself and others in the organisation that you work for. So without further ado, let's get in there with Dave and Lewis, and I'll see you on the other side. So fellas, what is Tactical Firefighting UK?
So quite some time ago, me and Lewis got together to share ideas cross-border. How do you do things? How do we do things? What's different? As time moves on, that collaboration grows and grows and grows. We then established a Northwest training group for the BA trainers. That falls under the NFCC. We report directly to the group above, which is the General Northwest Training Managers. As you start to meet up with like-minded people, you start to talk about how different counties do things, how do we tackle, which is essentially the same problem in different ways. We start collaborating more and more and more. And I think the catalyst really for this was, if we go back to two key events, Lewis arranged an event earlier this year, and then the next catalyst was yourself covering that event and then inviting Stacco on for a different chat as well, a similar chat.
Yeah, because Steppo went on to talk about IFRW, and then during that conversation about IFRW, I think he was mentioning about, wouldn't it be great if there was a bit of an open forum, some sort of platform people can come together, talk about different ideas, concepts, share different struggles that they're having. So Dave picked that up, ran with it. We already had it at the Northwest group, started to branch that out, look to other people, because that's one thing with the event we had here in Lancashire earlier in the year. We found there's a massive sort of bunch of people who are just really enthusiastic about all this stuff, and just want to do the right thing, and get the information and share ideas. And so that it was dead easy to go to a group of people like that and find the people. And now on the group that we've sort of got, the conversation's great, isn't it? It's just really fluent. Yeah. There's always loads of talking points, loads of ideas.
I regularly wake up to 170 messages on there. Spend the first 40 minutes of my day catching up.
If you go away from your phone for 2 minutes, you come back, it's past you too quickly. You can't catch up.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together.
And I think when you look at my job description, and I know Lewis is the same, part of my job description is I have to keep on top of national and international changes to firefighting. My job title originally was actually called the Future Firefighting Lead. That's changed now to sort of tactical firefighting and breathing apparatus. But that still remains that I've got to have an eye on what is happening internationally that is going to improve firefighting. And I'll be honest, that's a very, very hard thing to do. I don't have that sort of network, or I didn't have that sort of network available to me to know what is cutting edge, what is changing, how are things progressing. But through those discussions I've been having with Lewis and as part of the Northwest group, and particularly that day that we had here, those 2 days that we had here, it became clear that there was a group of people out there that could do that. It shouldn't just be on one person. So it kind of organically grew to be this larger network of people that had this shared interest. So now, on a daily basis, I'm finding things out about firefighting that 12 months ago I wouldn't have done. And that is only going to benefit the UK Fire Service.
Isn't there also a fact that, and again, we're not going to go into the detail of individuals in that group, but a lot of these people don't necessarily work in a training department, but they're incredibly passionate firefighters, crew managers, LFs, sub-officers, watch commanders, and I think 1 or 2 that sit a little bit above that. But there is a thing where, like, in the services, in the brigades, the lead for BA, there's a big weight that falls on that person's shoulders to try and be everywhere, be the answer to everything, and have the latest information on whatever it might be. Whereas there's a massive amount of really curious, interested people. I'm sure you guys speak to them every day where it's like, oh, I'd love to work in the training department because I've got a real passion for X. But perhaps because of personal circumstances or just they want to stay on the trucks, they never perhaps go into a role like that, but they still have a tremendous amount of value to add, don't they?
Totally, yeah. I mean, that's always the funny thing. I mean, with my job, it's BA training manager. We're in Lancs, and it's funny really because you go to a lot of other places internationally, and it doesn't sort of BA is just sort of seen as a bit of a PPE. But when it's BA in Lancs or even in the rest of the UK, sort of talking about all operations which sort of centre around BA, it sort of falls with everything which is tactical firefighting really. It sort of falls under that heading of BA, so it can be really, really broad. So if you're doing BA, you sort of look at high rise. You're looking at a lot of things that have a lot of crossover for incident command as well. which I find. But yeah, I mean, the people in that group, like you said, it's really diverse between what roles they sit in, what jobs they do. But that's the benefit of it, really. If it was everyone just from a training department, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of benefit there. But having people who are actually actively day in, day out doing these techniques, there's a lot to be said for it.
Absolutely. I think you've got to accept, as well as a watch officer on a station, you're still responsible for that training. We've got a lot of people in my organisation. I'm responsible effectively for training up to 1,300 people in breathing apparatus over a 12 or a 24-month period, but I couldn't do that alone. So yeah, we have a group of trainers, but we also have that additional group of watch officers out there that are doing the BA training on days and on nights, and it's about trying to find how do we provide some information to them that can be delivered on a station just of an evening, an hour. It's not all about coming into a training centre, doing a really intensive heat and smoke breathing apparatus work and getting assessed. Sometimes it's the finer details. It's that chalk and talk that you do in a classroom that's
what gives you the conceptual understanding of the wider stuff, isn't it? It's like it hasn't, because all honesty, when you're in BA and you've got that sensory deprivation a little bit, it's quite hard to have any kind of reflection on what you're doing. You're just in the moment, trying to A, survive it, and B, hear whatever the instructing teacher is shouting roughly in your direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think the majority of training which goes on in any fire rescue service, the majority of it isn't at the training centre. The majority of it happens on watches. And often you're a product of what training you had as well. You can be a product of the training you got at the training centre, and you just cascade that on. And this is the beauty of having that connection with people and services. We can look at the program we've got, update them, use that to influence it, and then that just goes out to other areas, and then they can influence the training they give people. And
I think of it like a business, because you're often too busy working on the thing you're too busy working in the thing to work on the thing. And a lot of training centres feel like they're an assessment centre now. It's because we've gone down to a skeleton crew, haven't we? Where you haven't got time to step out, attend some events, do some networking, other than the regional, organisational groups and collaborative groups that would try and share information there. But it's very hard as a lead for you to step out and try and develop anything, materials, presentations, especially with sympathy to the smaller services and brigades that are perhaps listening. It's very, very difficult for them. Some of them are only 2 or 3 people in their BA department.
And I think that's where this group's been really positive. And I will stress, something that you mentioned earlier about it not just being the training staff that's in there. It is a very informal group, really. It's not like an official structure. It is a very informal gathering of like-minded people just sharing ideas. And I suppose the overriding goal is a little bit of standardisation. That's pretty much it. And as the Northwest group, which is a little bit more formal, the overriding desire there is standardisation as well. I've never really been able to work out properly why, as soon as you cross a boundary, the fire hasn't changed, but the way we approach that fire isn't.
It has, Dave. It's changed completely.
And that's the thing, isn't it? It is literally, I can take the example that me and Lewis will probably share a few times, is if we're on this side of the boundary, we leave the door wide open, but if we go on that side of the boundary, we close the door down. And then when 2 appliances turn up to deal with the same incident from different counties, you've got this sort of impasse there. Well, which way is right?
Lewis, I interrupted you.
No. I mean, it's very interesting what you went back to talk about assessment centres as well. Because we just finished quite a few talks about the way that we do training, between doing it here, doing it in our own area. I think what we tend to get with people when they come to training centres, you get a lot of, naturally you get quite a bit of anxiety, quite a bit of fear, from perhaps the way that their course has been before. it's hot, you get bothered, and when people are hot and bothered, they get hot and bothered, and people don't particularly haven't enjoyed it in the past, and I think sometimes that can come with, being deathly silent, and a lot of these sessions can not be so much around the coaching and the supporting, which is definitely like a direction we try to go in, to get the best out of people, because a lot of the things that we talk about, some of the new techniques that we might have introduced, might be a little bit unfamiliar to people. So we try and give a little more coaching in our in our assessments. We're sort of using the term assessment a bit more broadly now. Naturally, when you're doing things like firefighting, it's safety critical, so you have to have an element of assessment to make sure someone's going to keep themselves safe when they're out there. But, I think a lot of time as well, as we know, incidents can be fewer and further between, so you got to give them, when they come back here for some sort of input, they've got to come away, feeling like they're taking something away from it. I think beforehand people can sometimes think that they've got everything to lose and nothing to gain if they're coming for some sort of BA training, because you're going to get hot and bothered, you're going to get sweaty, you're going to have a couple of hard wears, and you potentially not going to show you're as good as when you were on your recruits course, and you're going to go away with some sort of training need. And we don't want people to feel like that. We want people to come away thinking, oh, that was a really good day. I taught some new techniques. I'll go away. That's in my toolbox now. I'll be able to use that. So that's definitely the way we sort of looked at it more so now.
Yeah. I just want to say as well that having that few more things in your toolbox, and I know it's something that a lot of us say, and it's become kind of a cliche thing to say as a trainer, but it is really important. And for me as a trainer, for the team as a trainer, there's nothing better than when a crew actually says that, which is, right, you've shown me a technique there, that's up there now, ready for the next incident, and maybe we'll use it. And we have had some positive feedback as well, where people have said, oh, we were taught this a year ago, we actually deployed it, you're seeing it at incidents, maybe you're seeing it in the media, and you're saying, yeah, that thing that they're doing, that's what we taught them. And another interesting thing as well is not just when you're teaching something that's new, but sometimes when you're teaching something that's old, and maybe for a while we were told, oh, you can't do that anymore. And then we say, well, we've looked at it and actually you can. And it's very interesting when you teach something and people say, well, we were doing this, we were doing this back in the 80s or the 90s. We just didn't realise why we were doing it. And that's where we jump on and say, and that's the key. Now we do. Now we know the rationale. Now we know the science that what we were doing was correct. The science that we understood led us down the path of thinking, well, we need to change that. And I suppose this idea of a jet through the window is a key example of that. For years and years, I was teaching, no, don't put a jet through the window because you're going to cause a ventilation issue and it's going to increase the flames and everything. And there is science that backs that up. But it's this idea of, but what is it that you're actually doing with that water that's causing that? And now we get to the point where we say, well, actually, if you hold the jet in this particular way, and if you do this particular thing with this jet, this will work. But whatever you do, don't put it on spray, don't wave it around, because then you're going to increase the ventilation profile.
This episode is brought to you in partnership with MSA Safety. Today we have them to thank for the improved firefighter safety through connectivity in their brand new connected firefighter system. At the center of the connected firefighter platform is the MSA M1 SCBA with telemetry. That integrates straight in with the Luna system, which is a wireless all-in-one device creating an independent search and rescue network, providing edge detection, enhanced personal thermal imaging, while simplifying post-scene reporting and data retention. All of this then plugs into the FireGrid system for cloud-based connectivity, real-time information, and data-driven decisions for the incident commander. MSA are truly taking massive strides in the future of improved firefighter safety through connectivity in the brand new MSA connected firefighter platform. Now back to the show. We're going to leave people on that cliffhanger because I'm going to stop us getting down our first rabbit hole. Otherwise, we'll get down our rabbit hole. So I know the aspirational goal for the group that we're part of, that you guys have put together, is to be able to contribute to some sort of national guidance, some sort of national body, and have a really open dialogue with people. But when we were talking about that in the group, I often think of the aspect of like, give and forget, receive and remember. So just start adding value Don't worry about if anyone's going to acknowledge you for it. Don't worry about having a rubber stamp on something. Just go and start delivering value. So the idea of us three coming together today is for you to talk us through one of the key elements that has sort of reared its head in a previous conversation. So if people remember back to Shan Rafael was episode 201, we'll be touching on some of that today, and we will, and I'll leave it to you guys to acknowledge the other contributors and stuff like that. But we're going to go through something that came to light in the group, and again, was familiar to some, fully ingrained with others, completely void of context for some others. So we thought, let's take this and let's unpack it, unfold it, have a nice, tight, useful, deployable discussion about it, and then perhaps look at something else. Because otherwise we go into a million directions and don't go deep on any of them. And then people are like, well, that was a really warm, exciting bath, but I felt like Dave and Lewis had more to talk about, but we didn't have long enough and it was 3 hours already. Do you know what I mean? So I'm going to discipline myself to shut up, which will surprise some listeners. And whoever wants to go first, give us the starting context of what we're going to be talking about today, and then kick us off with taking us into the weeds and the detail of it.
So we'll talk about B-SAHF, which is, situational awareness mnemonic, which the SAFE model first put together by, Shan Rafael, and later the BE element added to it by, Ed Harting and Peter McBride as well. So it's worthwhile to credit, those people from it. I certainly, they're probably the same. I don't profess to be like an absolute expert in all of this. We've got some quals behind our name, and we teach this to people. But naturally, it's one thing I sort of notice is the more I learn about it, the more I realise how much I don't know. That's nothing about that group. It goes back to I learn something every time I talk to people. Every time I talk to Dave about this sort of topic, I learn something. When there's definitely nothing original about, the ideas I bring to the table with it. It's all things that are all out there. People can see and read and hear about it. We just sort of bring it to the forefront, certainly in our services, almost like conduits, in that sort of sense. But that's what the mnemonic's for, is to gain situational awareness for firefighters. And I think in a lot of cases, it's probably been given lip service beforehand. In a lot of ways, that probably a lot of people have done this. Incident commanders will have looked at all these things when they've been on jobs, and I don't think the mnemonic is there to sort of go through a checklist in your head of everything you need to be doing. They're just consideration points, and think about what each of these individual things are telling you, how you can use that to your own advantage. And it's not just for incident commanders; it's for everyone.
Because I would challenge you and say that not all incident commanders will have seen it, but I don't think they know what they're seeing. So that's why I think it's so useful for you guys to go through it, because a bit like a decision-making model and stuff like that, people go, well, I was doing that anyway. Yes, but this is a logical sequence for you to move through and pull all your information on that and go, yes, I know I'm seeing the other thing, but I'm not going to think about that now. I'm just going to think about this one thing, like the ventilation profile or whatever it is we go into. And then I'm going to go into this next element and look at that. So whilst, like you say, Lewis, people will, oh, but I've been seeing this all the time. Yeah, but me and you are both looking at the same thing, but we're definitely seeing something different because we've got different upbringing, we've got different training, we've had different experiences. But yeah, I think this should be taught with incident command, but I know that it's not. And a lot of incident command instructors don't have as big of a background as either of you in breathing apparatus, as an example. So I think it's going to be really valuable for firefighters, incident commanders, pump operators, and certainly the direct entry staff as well.
Definitely. I think why this is so powerful as a concept and so useful for firefighters is if you are the team leader and you are deep inside that incident, and what you're seeing is going to be different than what the incident commander outside is seeing and what different sectors are seeing, and it builds this profile up of this incident. It's such a simple idea, which is why I think it's brilliant. And yet it grows to be very, very complicated, and I think that's probably the wrong word, but it allows you to think about this fire as an elaborate system, as well as just a very simple system. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I had the real benefit and luxury of, when I went to Firefighting in Poland just earlier this year, I got to sit for 3 hours on a bus next to Shan Rafael,
Nice.
Name dropped.
Name dropped.
And actually sit with this presentation and go through it with him. Almost I tried to deliver it back to him, and that's another thing where you realise, wow, how much information someone's got and they can tell you about, and loads of insights. There's no better person to go through it with, really. So that was really, really good. But yeah,
so start dissecting that mnemonic for us, because we love our mnemonics in the fire service, and people, as they heard it the first time, they'll have tried to write it down so that they're ready to start writing things down against it when you start talking about it in a minute. So take us through each element, who and how they might observe it, and in what context it might be useful to support their situational awareness or tactical approach.
I mean, just first on the mnemonic, I don't think it could sound any better, B-SAHF. It couldn't have fit any better. But starting with it, we're talking with the B. Again, these are sort of added by Ed Harting. So we're looking at the building. So around that, there's loads of things to talk about. So this is where an incident commander's risk assessment starts. As soon as they pick up that tip sheet, they look at the type of incident, the property they might be going to, whether they've got any sort of prior knowledge of it, what they can know about the use. The use is naturally going to dictate something about the ventilation profile. It's going to dictate things about the fire loading. Has it got fixed insulation systems? The size in general, again, which dictates about ventilation, feeds into that about weight of attack. Naturally, I think we have the often the go-to thing in the UK fire service about 2BA 1 hose reel. If we're talking water, if we're talking committing teams, that's often been the go-to. I always think it's quite funny, really, with the UK fire service for a service in a country that's so heavily influenced by everything to do with safety. It seems that we really go on the lower end of anything which offers safety in terms of weight of attack, rather than sort of starting at the higher end of the volume and scaling back. We always sort of go on the very much the lower end and scale up if it's really bad. Often by that point it might be too late. But yeah, the contents, what you're looking at inside your building, they're going to burn differently. Naturally, we always, whenever we're going through this, we always talk about legacy furnishings as opposed to modern furnishings. So legacy furnishings, we'll also in the video between that UL have done, looking at how quickly we're achieving flashover in buildings from which have more solid sort of contents in them. Back in the day, we're looking at achieving flashover more like 20 sort of minutes. Now we're talking 4 minutes. If we're talking things like EVs and things like that, and electrical items, which and lithium-ion batteries, we're talking a matter of seconds. So
I think an easy one, just to relate that to something people might understand. If you pick up an old sofa and you go, wow, this is bloody heavy, yeah, because it's very dense wood, it's very thick foam, it's very heavy material. You could pick up your grandma can lift the end of her new sofa and hoover underneath it because it's very lightweight. It's been made with entirely different materials. People go, oh, yeah, but they're all fire retardant. But then you look at the toys and everything else, the way we make things now is more temporary, and they're significantly cheaper with an entirely different. So that's why when people go, fire hasn't changed. No, it has changed, because the thing on fire has changed. It's still a domestic property with domestic items in it, but the domestic items have changed.
I think just on that, just to elaborate a little as well, this is something that we've spoken with our officers in Manchester about a little bit just over the last couple of weeks. The concept of the heat release rate is something that I think we need to do a lot more on. We've historically concentrated on temperature, but any fire behaviour instructor will tell you the average temperature of a fire is always the average temperature of a fire, whether it's a candle or a flashover. The average temperature is generally the same, and that is physics. But the heat release rate of that is going to be exponentially higher in a stocked out building, but also the heat release rate is also going to depend on the ventilation profile of the building. So when we're looking at the building, we are looking at things like that. How many openings does that building have? What fire loading are we expecting that building to have?
What's interesting, I think, when you talking about it as well, things like heat release rate, heat flux, mass loss rates, things like that, I think you can quite quickly start to lose people. And then, but what's interesting, I mean, if we look at our profession, it is a profession. There is a level of naturally there's physicality to our job and what we do. But if you expect two electricians to talk to each other, they can talk to you about volts, amps, all them sorts of things. And again, like I said, there's nothing original about me. I'm stealing this from what, like John McDonough would say. But in terms of firefighters, when they're talking about things, they should be able to have a conversation about what, watts and megawatts and things like that in terms of heat.
Well, the IFEs used to have to learn Ohm's law and Boyle's law and everything like this, and now some people don't. I used to love going with my dad, and he'd tell you how a dam was constructed and things like that, and then you'd do the old pressure with a elephant wearing a high heels, and you talk about pascals and all that sort of stuff. But now I think a lot of people think it's very irrelevant, though. Not really. The team here at the podcast are extremely excited to announce our brand new partnership with Patrol Store UK. Patrol Store has been serving the UK's police, fire and emergency communities and first responder sector since 2008, providing leading brands such as Hikes, Magnum, 511, Nebo, Op Zulu, Highlander, AKU and many, many more of our favourites. They are now also supplying bespoke uniform, PPE and station workwear to fire services around the UK. So for all our listeners that are part of your USAR, your HEART team, your ISAR team, your armed response teams, your fire investigation, your NALO, your hazmat and all of the training departments that have got your own budgets, be sure to get the absolute best for your team at a realistic price by contacting Aaron and the team at Patrol Store and referencing the Firefighters podcast. Patrol Store will also be taking part in our listener competition giveaways, as well as providing unique discounts to podcast listeners. So for people that are always asking about Hikes boots as an example, that is one unique discount code that is coming to you very soon through Patrol Store. We've also got some incredible bags. I mean, the Op Zulu bags are a game changer. So the really Gucci and expensive tactical black bags that everyone's using in CrossFit workouts and taking to the gym and taking to stations? Well, they've basically got that, but it's made better and costs less, because they're not slapping some Gucci expensive brand name on it and it's giving you what you want on a first responder salary. Be sure to keep your eyes in the notes of the episodes for links to unique offers and discount codes. And if you're looking to buy well and buy once, be sure to get in the notes and head over to Patrol Store UK. Now back to the show.
You're trying to pick out the relevant elements, and I've been as guilty as anyone else in the past, because you study for IFE exams, etc., and the question always comes, is that relevant on the fireground? Now, it's very difficult when you're studying for an IFE exam to put the context of what you're seeing on page into an incident. But I think when we talk about B-SAHF, we kind of flip that on its head and we start looking at the context first and then thinking about the calculations after. So for example, on a building, one of the things I would recommend is if you switch off and don't listen to anything we say other than this bit, what is the size of the building? What is the area of the building? And if you know what the area of the building is, you can have a good stab at what litre per minute you would require, what the flow rate is. So we're using a calculation in my organisation where we're saying area times 5. So if you've got a 200 metre square building, or should I say 200 metre square fire, times that by 5, you get 1,000, so 1,000 litres per minute should be what it is. Now I will caveat that
that's
with,
Paul Grimwood's research.
That is very, very simplified.
Yeah, and I always like to sort of, I talk about that as well, because we have the same, and what's very easy, and you often do this in any room that you're in, I mean, a lot of the time, we're talking high pressure hose reels, and often the 19 mil, what a lot of services have, some have 22, we've just gone to 22s on some of our pumps as well. We're talking 19, you're looking at around 100 litres per minute, 120 litres per minute, depending on the sort of pressure you get through them. You can quite easily show then, in that room, by just walking 5 metres by 5 metres, the sort of size of room which is involved in fire, where you sort of max out at with that rule of thumb for the adequate flow rate, if you just sort of size up in wherever you are. So then you sort of can ask have that question, you know, generally speaking, when you're going into fires, what sort of flow rate are you taking, you know? And it often is the hose reel. Now, it's not to say that it's not going to be you don't have a lot of success with that. Of course you are in a lot of cases, but it can only take something really like a window failing, increase in wind, or something like that, for you all of a sudden to be, you know, outgunned by the heat release rate you're going to get from that fire, and then all of a sudden you have nothing in reserves. You have nowhere to go, and in a lot of cases, I think with 90mm hose reels, you know, we've had a lot of success. Don't get me wrong, very very good and quick and effective, but that's what you're going to be really effective with all the time if it's all you practice with. If you're never practicing with your 22 or with your 45s or with your lay flats and things like that, naturally your efficiency is going to go down. You're going to really struggle with it. So in terms of just going back to B-SAHF and how that all relates, the size of the building, the ventilation profile, the likely area, location, if it's got any sort of retrofit systems, it's going to dictate, and it should be dictating, you know, the weight of attack, what we're looking at. So that's not necessarily going to be, that might be a hose reel, it might be a 45. It depends. If it's a high rise, you're either looking at maybe a 50 plus line or something like that. So, you know, if that's what you operate with.
So just give us that calculation one more time, because I know people would have heard it twice as we were speaking quickly, and this is available in some of Paul Grimwood's research. I'll try and find the link for it, because that's where it came from. Dan Stevens actually spoke about it on a recent episode. Give us it again, because he rushed past it as well, and then we can move on to something else.
Yeah, so it's area times 5. So if you imagine, if you just mark out 5 by 5 in a room, so 5 times 5, 25, times 5, 125, you can sort of quickly see that for 125 litres per minute, that's sort of the area involved in fire, which the NFCC guidance, weight of attack for, let's say, 90mm hose reel. Mm-hmm. Go a bit bigger than that. If you start looking at, you know, bigger areas, then the weight of attack is going to start to go up. It might be looking at 2 hose reels. It might be looking at 22mm hose reels. It might be looking at 45. Then all of a sudden it does depend as well on making sure your branch operators aware of that, and then dialing up on the flow ring as well to the right, you know, selectable flow. So it doesn't just mean, you know, quite often people think, oh, it's a 45, I've got more water. Well, yeah, but not if you've got it set on 115. You know, so I know it's obvious. But, yeah. You know, in the heat of the moment, when there's a load of other stresses going on, are we sort of is someone always going to pick up on that straight away? You know, if they're not practicing it, if they're not, you know, drilling into it.
Because when they're just about to go through BA, like you say, they're checking they've got water, and they might check the cone adjustment. Are you checking the flow rate? And just to contextualise that for people, so if we're using that mathematics of 5 by 5, most rooms are ever so slightly smaller than that in the UK. But if you use that 5 by 5 as a nice number, to me, the way I translate that is it isolated to the room of origin? If it is, then maybe you'll be fine with that hose reel. If it's spread past the room of origin, you should start thinking bigger straight away, because most rooms might be 3 by 5, 3 by 4, but depending on the fire loading, which could be a long spectrum inside that room, you really need to tell yourself a hose reel is enough for one room. If it's bigger than that, I need to think bigger. Sorry, Dave.
No, you're fine. I was just going to say another key factor with the B-SAHF assessment, you know, you can call it what you want to call it, size up, it doesn't really matter. But a key element to this is to think, when you're looking at this fire, what you're trying to do is predict what it's going to do next, where it's going to go next, how it's going to grow. So when we're looking at the weight of attack, one mistake that's easy to make is, right now this fire is that size, therefore I'm going to go with this. What you should be thinking is, what will that fire look like in 5 minutes? If it's going to take me so much time to get this jet laid out, what will it look like at that point? So do we then need to think, well, we'll go a little bit bigger?
So we went next to, I know we're speaking in and around environmental factors as part of that BE. Take us to environmental factors and what that means. How far are we zooming out when we're talking about environment?
So I like this addition of environment personally, and this came as a bit of a bolt out of the blue, because anyone that's not familiar with the B-SAHF assessment, will probably not realise that the E is relatively new. It's still called the same thing because you can't really change its pronunciation, can you, by adding the E, which is great. But it is very handy. But what I like about the addition is it takes some of the elements out of the S, the A, the H, and the F. So it actually contextualises it and says, although the air track is important, there's a difference between the air track that's being generated by the fire in the building and the air track that's being generated by, say, the wind. And it allows you at an earlier point to think, what impact is wind having? What impact is the temperature having or the humidity having? And by that I mean the environmental, sort of the weather, and the topography of the building. What impact is that having on that fire?
Yeah, I mean, we put into this really as well on ours when we were delivering this, a bit on case studies as well. And the environment, predominantly when we talk about environment, yes, we're talking about weather, yes, we can talk about topography, but ultimately a lot of it does come down to, a lot of the main sort of focus in it is around wind, and also in that, depending on how tall the building is, how big the building is, what wind can almost get created as well, by stack effects.
I think we always talk about wind when it comes to high rise, but we forget that it's just because it becomes a bigger factor when you're aloft. And we talk, high rise blowtorch effect, it's like word association game. Do you know what I mean? But I'm like, but there's still wind here. There's still wind where we are now. Yeah,
and particularly in coastal areas as well. And but anyway, you go anywhere, you start going a few meters higher, it becomes a massive issue. And I think especially when we've talked about ventilation, we have different sort of levels of use of ventilation in the UK. Some use it for a long time, some have already only newly sort of introducing it. But I think, generally speaking, one thing that we can all sort of share in common is you don't want to be on the wrong side of a ventilation flow path. We all understand the concepts around, offensive ventilation, where it's having a bit of an effect on the fire. So the wind's an important one on that. We want to make sure we're approaching from upwind, so we're not finding ourselves in the wrong place when we are.
Because people will say, "Well, Lewis, I can't do anything about the wind. I appreciate you want me to acknowledge it. There's nothing on my truck to do anything about the wind." But I was taught one a long time ago, and I'm not going to swear, but it was wind on my back, good to attack. Wind on my front, don't be a silly sausage. Do you know what I mean? And that's just a nice thing to think. Well, just because I've driven here and I've arrived at the front of the building, when I'm doing that, read the fire, read the smoke, can I consider an entry point that's not the wind blowing straight at me in case a window is broken or failed at the back and all that sort of jazz? But sorry, sometimes it's just useful to have like those little hooks for silly minds like me that might help me remember it.
Yeah, no, totally. That's it's a really easy one for people to remember as well. Massively important. So like we go for a case study for an incident in Orange County, and the approaching firefighters, what did they have? Straight away they had wind prevailing coming straight at them across the yard as they approached the front of a property, and they went to the front. Okay, naturally, because probably in a lot of cases that's what they always do, I think at the same time they have engines and truck companies, and another truck company went around the back, but I think before water was applied, they've made their way in, and quite quickly they found they're on the wrong end of the flow path, and they've had to try and bail out. Well, one's managed to get out and one's not. What's really helped that though is when water did come on from the other side, reduce that pressure, improve conditions, and straight away they're able to get inside and rescue them. So the wind, and actually using the wind to your advantage with your approach, getting your early water on, I think it's something we really try and highlight the importance of that.
I think it's important to acknowledge as well, because we do have a lot more control over it. Yeah, like back in the day of where everything was single pane, you're like, we're in a rush against when the windows are going to fail. and in Australia and America and some places like that, it's still a lot of single pane. We've got a lot more control over the ventilation profile of that building because our windows aren't going to fail as quickly. So we've got a little bit more time to think about that and not just brush the shoulder off and go, well, there's nothing I can do about it, Dave. You know, it is what it is. We go, no, because the windows haven't failed yet. And before some moron goes around smashing windows arbitrarily because they're trying to vent the property, but outside of your tactical plan, we have the liberty of that. We're as much as building construction, we're not going to go into building construction, is the bane of a lot of people, especially when we talk about high-rise. We have actually got some, we've made a lot more advancements in the UK. I think a lot quicker than some other nations. They've got some very old buildings over there, haven't they?
Yeah, I mean, on that as well, I mean, we talk about stack effects, we talk about how that can reverse as well. You can have a reverse stack effect depending on what sort of time of the year when you're experiencing it, so it can cause pressure differentials, your smoke to move, I'm
going to have to force you to expand on stack effect for people that don't know what it is, sorry.
Right, so in terms of stack effect, what we're talking about is, if you look at a high-rise building, let's say, and you notice that we tend to show, picture paints 1,000 words, we tend to show a video of what Dave McGrail from Denver put together. So you'll notice any sort of high-rise building you go into tends to have revolving doors, and when you open up the doors into those, you'll find is often you can feel quite a strong wind when you walk inside there, and people might think that's strange. It doesn't feel particularly windy outside, but what is that? And what it is, it's a stack effect, right? What they're feeling. So what's basically happening inside there? If you've got more buoyant air inside, what that's going to cause to do is raise up. When the openings get created at lower levels, it's going to cause air movement. And then if those doors remain open, that air movement can potentially impact on your fire, if that's further up inside the building. Flip that on its head though, you can have reverse stack effects if you sort of move it into the summer months when you've got air-conditioned buildings, so it's a lot cooler inside than it is outside. When you open up them same openings, you get smoke movement in the opposite direction. Suppose in terms of these temperatures which you can experience, they can be a bit more extreme. So it's not something we come across quite as frequently, but it is still a factor because we still get very hot months and very cold months. So we include it to give people overall understanding of that general stack effect and the reverse stack effect as well.
I think it helps people understand the purpose of pressurized staircases as well, because if you've got an outward facing door at the bottom of a staircase, sometimes they're hard to open because of that very same effect. But if it's a pressurized staircase, they'll all open and close very nicely. And then if doors fail on different floors, it's almost the invisible barrier. It's going to push. It's almost like you open, the door fails and there's a whole load of wind with its hands there going, no, because it's pressurized and it doesn't allow that free flow of air. But sorry, I just think it's really useful because I don't want to lose anybody along this trail of super useful stuff. So stack effect, any other elements to cover on environmental factors?
I suppose another element to think on with environments, ambient temperature can have to a certain degree an impact on how the fires can behave. So I know we discuss sort of oxygen concentration. Generally if you've got colder air, generally you might have more oxygen concentrated in a smaller space. It's not going to, I don't think it's going to have the biggest of impacts, but it is something to be aware of. And particularly if you've got these temperature differentials, this air is going to move quicker. And that is something that you do see. We just mentioned about the stack effect. If you do get the opportunity to watch that video that Lewis mentioned, it's quite striking.
Provide me with a link to it. I will stick it under in the notes and people can access it from there. I think I have got the link somewhere.
It just shows
it in our
cold
WhatsApp group.
Yeah, it's just a really good indication of like a positive stack effect where you have very cold temperature outside, warmer building on the inside. Naturally, the buoyant air is moving up. You open up that door, and you just get a massive gush of wind, which is trying to create, replace that void. So, yeah, it's pretty powerful. Certainly, should send it over to you.
There's also the impact as well we have to accept on the firefighters as well. So if we're having warmer temperatures, if we're having humid weather, things like that, potentially a firefighter is likely to tire quicker as well. Definitely. So that's another good thing why I like this as an introduction. We've always thought about what is the impact of the fire on firefighting, but we have to think about what is the impact of the fire on the individual as well. What is the impact of the environment on the individual? When they get out of that incident, have we got space for them to recuperate? If it's humid, if it's hot, less so. That might mean a larger turnover of staff at the incident.
And those should be those early indicators for your makeup. And as Dan was saying the other day, you've asked for 4 pumps. Okay, what are you going to do with them? You know, because I always think a nice one is just 20 minutes. Now the set should last longer than that. I've got a team in, you go, right, I'm good because I've got a team in downstairs. One's going left, one's going right. Okay, so in 20 minutes time, are you going to have put this fire out? Not sure, maybe, if they're really good. So let's assume you're not going to. Have you got your next 2 sets of firefighters, you know, your next 4 firefighters ready to go in? And if it hasn't worked, are they ready to go in with a bigger firefighting media? And it starts thinking that, because you're like, are they going to get here and set up and be ready at the board in 20 minutes? Because the time is ticking now. So do that makeup early. You can always send them back. Ever heard the quote that true leaders are readers? Well, we believe this is true. Listeners often ask where we go to keep our finger on the pulse of what's happening in the sector globally. So there are a few key publications which I encourage you to go check out. Now, if you're looking for insights on disaster management, fire protection and firefighting, for us, we go to Asia Pacific Fire Magazine. And when you're looking for the latest on the Middle East fire protection industry and fire services, it's Gulf Fire Magazine. And our quarterly check-in is with International Firefighter Magazine, reporting to municipal, industrial and fire training professionals. Now, next up, and widely accepted to be the global voice for passive and active fire protection, this is a good one. It's International Fire Protection Magazine. And finally, and perhaps the most relevant to our predominantly UK audience, I'd strongly suggest subscribing to UK Fire Magazine, reporting to the United Kingdom fire protection industry and fire services. We're really excited to announce that after a long-standing relationship and mutual respect, we've now partnered with MDM Publishing, who bring you all of these essential publications. Because in a world of change, the learners shall inherit the earth, while the learned shall find themselves perfectly suited for a world that no longer exists. Eric Hoffer said that, and I believe he was right. So keep growing, keep learning, and keep yourself in the know and at the cutting edge of what's happening globally by dropping into the notes. And as a gift from the podcast, you can actually subscribe to any of these publications for free using the link in our notes. So we've got the first 2 elements there. We've got the building effects. We spoke about some environmental effects. Take us on to the second element, that SAFE or SAF aspects, because there's 4 things there, some of which we'll have touched upon already, but some we can probably expand on, most definitely.
Yeah, so smoke, on to with the first part of it. And often, you know, what can we tell from the smoke? What indications that giving us, you know, about how far the fire is along its development? Mm-hmm. Is all smoke dangerous? Is all smoke flammable? Is all smoke, you know, toxic? Easy answer, yes. Should we be dealing with all of it? Should we treat it all? You know, should we respect all of it? Yes. You know, so we talk about the volume. The volume you've got can be quite a good indication, you know, of how well ventilated fire is. You know, happy fire with good source of air, which is burning quite freely with plenty of flame, potentially going to have not quite as much smoke. Doesn't mean it's not quite a significant fire you're dealing with. There be, you know, on the other side of that, if you have quite a large volume of smoke, if it's going into a decay, into more of a vent limited sort of state, you still might have a reasonably smallish fire or sort of contained to one area, but you might still have a quite high volume of smoke. On that, the colour as well, you know, this is one thing you tend to, I think there's a lot of training scars which come off colour, and this misconception that if it's light or it's white or it's, you know, not acrid black thick smoke, it's not dangerous, it's not flammable, it's not fuelable. You know, it's not the case at all. You know, the white smoke which we've seen early on is pyrolysis gases. You know, it's pyrolysis smoke, and that is, you know, containing all of the nasties effectively which are inside that product which have just been released because of the heat which has been put onto it. The missing element it's got in there is the carbon concentration, which is still remaining in the products, but you're still getting a lot of them white nasties which are going up into your atmosphere. Will they ignite? Of course they will. And not even particularly at high temperature. So this is where we really, go into the need and requirement for gas cooling. And I think in a lot of cases, people have said before, well, if it's not particularly hot, I won't cool. Again, it goes back to sort of non-negotiables. When should we do it? It's impossible for someone to make a distinction between whether smoke is going to, we've already said it's all fuel, but it's impossible to make a distinction when it's going to ignite and when it's not going to ignite. No one can do that. Mm-hmm. So what's the answer? It's just to cool the gases and dilute them and ultimately make it safer. So naturally you can go from the whites. If you've got the presence of a bit more flame, you can move on to the greys. Dependent on whether you move into a incomplete combustion state, you can move on to the sort of darker colours, the blacks. There's browns in there as well if you've got the tars which you get released from the wood. So there's a bit of variant there in what they can, the colours that they will be, but it all needs to be dealt with. Do
you know what worries me most about white wispy smoke? Do you know what worries me most about white wispy smoke? Because we're yet to have one to my knowledge, but domestic lithium ion storage. So all of these second-hand lithium ion batteries, we nearly got one at my property because we've got solar panels on the roof and we've got 2 electric vehicles. And it was like, we're not using all of our solar because we're out all day. If we start getting, and they will already exist, I'm confident with the early adopters, there'll be some sort of storage capacity inside the home. And if that is a second-hand thing, which it likely is, because I don't think there's many companies specifically making them for domestic homes, it will be some retrofitted thing. If that goes into thermal runaway, you will see a light, wispy, very, very light smoke. And I fear to see the news of an incident commander or a BA team going, it's very, very light smoke, let's make some progress, let's get up there. We're not going to gas cool, it's not even warm. Do you know what I mean? And then the whole goddamn building explodes. That's my real concern. But we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. But just to give an indication of, you see smoke, start adopting your tactical firefighting.
I think it's a really important point to make, to be honest, because I think what that shows is that point you just made there, Pete, is it tells you that this mnemonic, this way of approaching it, is pretty future-proof in many ways, because when this was first, well, certainly when I was first teaching this, the idea of living my own fires, it wasn't really there was no real such thing as EVs, mobile phones, maybe just be coming to the fore. It wasn't very common, but now that we're seeing that, we're starting to think, right, there's a different way of thinking about smoke now. And one of the best things I've heard about smoke, I think it was John Madonna that said it, is that smoke's a precursor to fire. And if we accept that, if we understand that, wherever you see smoke at that incident, we need to do something about it, because if we don't do something about it, very shortly that is going to be a flame. There's a lot to think about with regards buoyancy, the velocity of the smoke. I mean, in layman's, if I was just to say to someone how to sum it up really quickly, if you look at smoke and you think, ooh, look at that, that's going some, that you need to do something about it.
Because like you say, I know you've spoken a lot there about the colours and stuff, Lewis, but go into some of the real basics for me, Dave, around the volume and pressure, because we've omitted some of the obvious things because we're assuming the learning level of the audience. But talk to me just very briefly around volume, intensity, signs of backdraft, all that sort of jazz, and that will probably wrap it up for smoke.
Yeah, so when you are seeing copious amounts of smoke, it's quite simple. That means there's a lot of combustion going on. That's the general gist of what's going on. So large copious amounts, velocity of that smoke as well, the amount of energy that is in there. If it is moving quickly, it is telling there's a lot of heat in there. It's telling that the heat release rate is quite high. What we tend to see, there's loads and loads of videos online of incidents, where you're watching the smoke, then all of a sudden, boom, there's a massive fire. What we see a lot of is large copious amounts of high energy, extremely dark smoke is telling you that that fire is underventilated. And if that fire gets that little bit more ventilation, whether that's through improper tactical ventilation, improper use of a branch, improper openings or whether the fire just self-ventilates itself, the next stage is huge increase in heat release rate and a huge flame front. I think if you were going to keep it simple, that'd be as simple as you could go.
Yeah, I mean, as well on that, if you've got big velocity, fast moving smoke, can be an indication of sort of distance of travel, which you're looking at for if your team going in. How close is it? If over that distance, if the smoke is sort of reduced in temperature, naturally going to lose its buoyancy, it's going to drop down. But also, what's happening there is there's a lot of mixing. I mean, we've all sort of seen an aquarium, and when you have pre-mixed flames and you give them ignition, the sort of bang that they go. So 10 times the intensity of a diffusion flame, you've got there a pre-mixed area which crews are going into. So yeah, the velocity that it's moving at can be an indication of location. But then at the same time, just because there's not a massive velocity to it moving, that still means there's a decent, area of premixed smoke which is volatile.
I think from the outside as well, if we're talking about a lack of smoke, which can be a concern sometimes, there's a couple of videos that we use in our training packages where you've got quite a large building, maybe 4, 5 or 6 windows, and what's being displayed there is not a great deal of smoke at all. But the smoke that is coming out of those windows is going straight up, and I mean literally straight up, so small amounts but straight up. And when you look at that, your initial thought is there's not a great deal of danger there, but when you start picking away and you're thinking, well, why is there a lot of energy in the smoke but not much? That leads you down the path of thinking, well, this is quite a well-sealed building, so therefore if it's well-sealed, it's likely underventilated. If it's underventilated and I'm seeing high amounts of energy in there, well, potentially I'm looking down the lines of a backdraft now. So it allows you to predict what might happen to a B-18 before you deploy the B-18.
Because obviously there's that element of delayed backdraft as well, like you say, just because you can see the smoke escaping, if it is really thick, as Lewis has alluded to, it's still underventilated. So it has vented, but is still underventilated, so it's still a ventilation control fire. So as we're treading all over air already, we might as well move into that. So talk to us about flow paths, uni and bidirectional, what these mean, what the exits what the exit of smoke, what it can teach us about it, and how we can interact and or manipulate that to our advantage.
Can we also refer to so again, when John Madonna was doing the presentation and the information sessions he was doing here, the one thing that's absolutely stuck with me, and I don't want to go down necessarily fully the rabbit hole of the non-negotiables, but there is one non-negotiable in particular that's relevant here, and that's controlling the flow path. Okay. And controlling the flow path for me is critical. People can argue about, do we stay low all the time, do we gas cool if there's no heat, etc. But controlling the flow path is crucial. The first thing we get told for fire behaviour as a firefighter is the triangle of combustion and how important air is, and that we need air. And when you go all the way back to the 1800s with even Braidwood's teaching, how important controlling the flow path is, and that is why this is one of the most important elements of B-SAHF, is looking at what the air track currently is and how do we attack that fire, how do we have an impact on that fire without compromising that flow path. And in the last couple of years in particular, the advent of smoke curtains has been absolutely brilliant to help us in approaching a fire without massively impacting on the air track.
So just expand on that perhaps, Lewis, because people will go smoke curtain, and again, if we did word association game, they might go, yeah, I know smoke curtains, we use them in a high-rise. We only get them off when we go to a high-rise. As soon as we're interacting with the compartment, if we walk through a door, we're expanding that area of the flow path. So just take us down there a little bit on why this is a useful tool and how we might consider using it.
So, I mean, if you just quickly go back to talking about flow paths and bidirectional flows and unidirectional flows as well, it sort of feeds into this too. If you've got quite, if you're looking at your entry point and you've got a bidirectional flow where you have, air track moving in, refer to gravity current, whatever you want, and you have smoke moving out, can be quite a good indication that, it might be that that's the single source of air where that fire is getting it's getting its air from, and the single point of ventilation. It might not be. There might be some other area. You might be able to pick that up by looking at your incident 360 and things like that. But it might be. It might be that it's very easy then to put this fire into a ventilation controlled state. Now, if you're looking at something which got a bit more of a unidirectional flow, one sort of track of air moving in through the building, that's probably a pretty good indication that it's got an outlet on the opposite side where all that heat, flame, smoke, gas is going from. So can you attack the fire from a different sort of location? But then on the smoke curtain, where that's really come, we've started using it as a tool operationally on not just for any domestic fire, not just for high rise. One thing I think we've not been particularly, when we adopted the Swedish methods of gas cooling and things like that, I don't think we were able to take on the anti-ventilation quite as much. And then came about fans as well, and depending on sort of how quickly you pick them up, we found a lot of door wedging, which sort of doesn't sit in too well with the anti-ventilation models. The benefit to the smoke curtains, using it operationally, time to fit one. If it's taking you more than 10 seconds to fit a smoke curtain, it means you're not practicing with it enough. So the argument that it takes a long time to fit them, I'm not sure I buy into too much. They are very, very quick to use. They're very, very easy to use. So fitting ones can be very, very fast. So it's a well-versed crew. It's going to stop the air which is coming into and eventually going to feed that fire. So particularly if you're a crew who's arriving at a door, you might be opening it up for the first time. You want to keep that fire sort of limited to the sort of state it's in, rather than open up, leaving that door open, and now you're letting a lot of air in to go and feed it. Sticking a smoke curtain on that door is, going to really manage that. Another thing, really, with probably a reason why we weren't able to take the Swedish model of having the door control. The Swedish model, they had a team who would go inside, but then have a third person as well who were responsible for managing that door. And in some of those doors as well, they had doors which opened not into the building, but away from you as you're going in or towards, whichever way you're sort of looking at it. But making it a bit easier to manage a door and closing it down and do door control. And when I say door control, I'm not especially talking about door entry. I'm talking about managing the amount of air which goes in. They were having a person on that doorway, keeping it closed down, and able to manage the hosing as well. Wasn't especially something which is easy to do for us, particularly if you're talking two-person teams and if your doors don't open in that direction. So having that smoke curtain gives us that option. We can put that on there. We can limit the amount of air which is going in to feed it. Slowly the heat release the fire down, stop it getting any worse. And we always tend to show this video. Again, I'll send you a link to that, which is probably my favourite video of anything. Definitely to show an air track is firefighter goes to the door, kicks the door in, hear a smoke alarm going off. It's quite wispy smoke which is exiting from the first floor, and then you're sort of talking, the OIC is going back, it's briefing the crew, okay, get yourself under air, there's a fire on the first floor. Very, very quickly there's flames licking out of that window, and they present. And then I think in the past, I don't want to discredit anyone, but I think sometimes we've sort of not looked at the correlation between air and the fire getting worse. It's often been, we've thought, it's gripped hold of something else has started burning in there, the situation's changed. Well, the situation only changed because we made it worse. We opened up a door, we opened up a vent door, and that all of a sudden went from a job we were going to spend an hour at to something we're getting relief crews in for, because it's through the roof now and we have to get...
Especially if it then takes them 12, 13 minutes to actually get to that room of origin.
Yeah.
Then, it's not just, all right, we've opened up, we've made sure we've got access, now I'll brief you for 3 minutes, then you'll have a tap dance with the door for 4 minutes, and then eventually it might be 20 minutes till you get to that bloody room of origin. Yeah,
and in which case, don't bother now. Don't bother now. We'll just put in, we'll just project it from the outside now. So the great thing about them as well, fans. You can still use your fans in conjunction with that. It doesn't take away from that option of it. The air track, managing the air track, whether we're talking air track, flow path, we pretty much use them interchangeably. them two terms. But yeah, we sort of encourage the use of them. I mean, not in all cases. I think in one thing it goes back to, if you manage your air track or you manage your flow path and you're considering that and you don't need to, there might not be a massive benefit. Well, it's not going to do you any detriment. It's better to do it, rather than not do it. So management of the air track is really, really important.
Definitely is. And just sort of earlier you mentioned about the bidirectional flow potentially at the front door. So to elaborate a little bit on that, you can have unidirectional flow, you can have bidirectional flow. And what we mean by that is a bidirectional flow, you will have a flow of gases or fire sort of in the upper portion, and then underneath what you won't see, or you may see a little hint of it from the smoke underneath, is the air going in. Now when you've got that situation, generally what that means is that fire is using that one ventilation area as its inlet and its outlet at the same time. If you've got a full front of a fire, then it's clearly an outlet. Maybe it's smoke, but it's clearly using that as the outlet. And if there's nothing but there's smoke or fire going from somewhere else, then that is purely being used as an inlet. And that's very important to start working out where your inlets are, where your outlets are. And if you do have that bidirectional flow, it's generally a good guess, it's generally acceptable to think that room is likely, or that building is likely to only have that one area. And that's going to be important when you start to think about tactical ventilation. Is that a safe
as we option? Tiptoe into that tactical ventilation, do we want to be trying to achieve a bidirectional by closing something down, or do we want that unidirectional flow path? Is there a preferred way for when the firefighters are going in to give? I always think you want everything pushing away from the firefighter if you can get away with it. If you're a regular listener to the podcast, then chances are you are big into your own personal development and the development of firefighters around you. So I wanted to remind you of our mobile app Drill Book. This is a free training and development resources made by firefighters for firefighters. Heading on to Drill Book, you will find incident debriefs, radio messages, knots and lines, quick reference guides, quizzes every single day. We've got useful links to the ERG, to Web Rescue, to JESUP, Euro Rescue, 10-second triage, National Operational Guidance, and not to mention our daily quizzes where you will find questions on extrication, casualty handling, breathing apparatus, fire development, water rescue, rope rescue, you name it. It is the go-to resource if you've got a spare 5 minutes on the firehouse to develop yourself and those around you. Not only that, if you're looking to get into the fire service, we've got advice on there on interview questions, interview answers. You can build your own questioning in there. And again, remember, this is built by firefighters for firefighters, so you can add your own drills in there. You can pick the drills that you find the most favorite. There is literally hundreds of training ideas, hundreds of drills in there. Remember, this app is absolutely free and it grows every single day down to the contributions of our thousands and thousands of users. It's freely available on Android, Apple, and you will find it in the links for this podcast. Remember, it's called personal development. The clue's in the name. You've got to work twice as hard on yourself as you do on the job. So always be growing, always be developing.
Yeah, I mean,
now let's get back to the
definitely. Show. If you're looking to use your fan, you want to be having the unidirectional flow path which is coming behind you, pushing everything out and away from you, and then that sort of comes down to, depending on what sort of mode, whether you're calling it a mode, whether you're calling it a phase, whether you're calling it offensive, defensive, it comes down to having the correct size outlet and also the correct weight of attack to reduce the heat release around the fire and get onto it nice and quickly. But yeah, certainly. You want to make sure that it's a unidirectional flow path which you're creating, behind you, so you got the benefit of that.
I always try and use basements as an example when I'm teaching on that, because basements people are very nervous about, because it is a very powerful, ferocious bidirectional flow path. And if you're having them, I always use the example of pubs or brothels or whatever it might be, service hatches or other little ports. Not that I've ever been to a brothel. Trying to achieve that unidirectional flow path, because everyone's always like, oh, do I shuffle down on my bum? Try and get past it. Oh, I'm right in the flow path. Is there a way for us to affect that via speaking with the occupier, having that 360 and knowing what we're really looking for, looking at the flow path that presents at that entry point, prior to going, right, let's just have a quick deep breath and try and go down there as fast as we can and get through that really nasty bit so we're then in the basement? Well, is there anything we can do about it?
Difficult one. Basements and ventilation.
We're not going to get too much into basements because there's so much we could discuss there, and the London firefighters will go crazy. We've kind of alluded to it again, but it leads us nicely into the H and the F, because people, when they're hearing B-SAHF, B-SAHF, it's SAHF. So we're talking about heat and flame. We've alluded to it a little bit there. Someone unpack the final elements of it and talk a little bit around how that can determine the ventilation profile of the fire.
So the heat, for me, the key elements of this is thermal imaging. So I know in my organisation we scan from the outside. The incident commander has a thermal imaging camera to scan, and on the inside as well the BA teams use thermal imaging as well. Now, I do think there's a lot of work to do in the UK Fire Service, really embedding a good understanding of how to use the thermal imaging cameras and how to interpret them, and I think that those are two different things as well. But what we do teach is scan that from the outside, get a good idea of which part of the building is telling you it's warmer than any other part of the building. That gives you a good idea of potentially where that fire is likely to be. So then heat signatures. Something that we've talked in the past, we talked about training skies, didn't we, earlier? You know, we scan the door or we look for signs of heat on the door, and that'll tell you where the neutral plane is, which was the incorrect terminology in and of itself, but that will tell you where the interface is on the opposite side of the door. Notwithstanding the fact that it takes a lot of time for that heat to get through whatever that door is made of. So that's why really I think heat comes at the point that it's at. Once you've done your building assessment and all these things, you know what it's constructed of, it'll give you a better idea of how quickly will those components on that building transmit the heat so that you can pick it up from the outside on a thermal imaging camera, therefore making a educated guess as to where to send your teams and where to send that water.
Also, just on the indication you get from doors, if we're talking about door entry techniques, on a steel door, brilliant. It's going to give you plenty of them sort of indications of heat and everything like that, and that almost can lure people into a false sense of security, and we talk about painting doors, spraying doors from bottom to top and giving indications of heat, whether you choose to do that in your service, whether you don't. I mean, again, it's another thing that can give you false indications. If nothing happens, well, on a wooden
Well, if
door,
you're the fourth team going in on a steel attack box, then yeah, it's useful because it's red hot steel. It's training scar versus when you're going into a brick building with wood doors.
Yeah, on an insulated door, you're going to take very, very little. Does that mean there's nothing going on behind that door? No. So, still, you have to adopt. You're going to have to get into a position which is going to be, suitable to make entry. But then again, at the same time, that doesn't mean opening the door, closing the door several times, because again, you can fall into that trap of. We're going to close it down. We're going to have a conversation about what we want to do. No, we know what we're going to do. We're going to make our way in. We're going to cool it as we progress, and we're going to put it out as quickly as we can. If we spend too much time opening and closing this door, we're going to make it a lot worse. So there's also we have for the heat. There's either there's the tactile indicators, and there's visual indicators. So there's what we can see, and there's what we can feel, and quite often. I think often with heat, that can a lot of the time as well, for a lot of people, I find that's the people's metric, and certainly, for a lot of people I speak to, that can be people's metric for when they decide they're going to get low, which I think is pretty flawed in a lot of ways. We wear PPE with its sole purpose to protect us. We wear all this gear which is designed to safeguard us and stop us and stop us burning and withstand high temperatures and things like that. But if we are continually standing up, absorbing all that heat energy, and you're going to do that for a considerable amount of time, guess what? When you kneel down, you don't all of a sudden cool down. Your gear is going to be drenched and soaked in all that heat that you've already absorbed. So, taking the time to practice and drill and can move, with flexibility, low down. There's a lot of mileage in that. You can take out a lot less radiation. You're going to be able to be in a much better position to use your tick. Your tick's going to work down there. You're not going to get that build-up of, particulate on your lens. You're going to be able to apply water a lot more frequently. So, again, I'm not going to go into too much to, things like BA shuffle, the limitations there, but it's a British institution, isn't it? But
I think I'd be remiss if I didn't give the tip of the hat to Andy Starnes. We'll try and put a link to his YouTube page. There's a lot of fantastic content on there from Andy around thermal imaging and, like you say, standing up and that whiteout aspect and how long they take to start up and all that sort of stuff. Andy is the best place to go for a lot of that. So that kind of leads us back into that flame, which I know people can think of them interchangeably, but finish us off with that, Dave, on any elements you think we've maybe need to circle back to.
Yeah, so probably people wonder why does this come last, and realistically it's probably the last thing any member, any firefighter on the fireground is actually going to get up front and actually see. But it is really, really important information for a BA team to communicate back to an incident commander elements of the flame, such as, is the flame diffused, is it pre-mixed? If it's pre-mixed, something seriously needs attention. Yeah. Generally it should be a diffused flame. Whereabouts in the room is that flame? Is it in the middle of the room, which in theory should be easier to deal with? It shouldn't grow as quickly. Is there one flame or there multiple flames? Is the flame on the wall, sort of in the side of the wall, or is it in a corner? And we have sort of the 1-2-4 rule, where you've got a fire in the middle of the room will grow at a certain rate, a fire at the back of the room will grow double the rate, and a fire in the corner will grow 4 times. A lot of people I've spoken to recently have said, a bit of legacy training, keep the fire burning so that you can see. And I'm not about to sit here and say, don't do that or do that. There's arguments in both camps. But what I would say is, if that fire is in the corner of the room, your time frame is extremely limited. If your fire is in the middle of the room, you might have that opportunity to do a little bit more looking around before you deal with the fire.
Yeah, I think just to touch on that, I agree with Dave. That's one thing that you tend to hear from people, and I think it's a bit of a legacy thing. If you can see the flame, the fire, use the light of the fire to search for people, and and don't be wrong. I think that's certainly a sound rationale. In theory, however, we're talking about products now which burn and give off a lot more nasties and develop a lot quicker. I think getting water onto your fire as quickly as possible, getting that extinguished, going to do you, a lot more favours than
monkey see, monkey do. See fire, hit fire. That's why I always say, see fire, hit fire. But I'll use it to see. Well, good job we gave you a thermal imaging camera. Hey, you little sausage.
I mean, we talk about colour as well, with flame, because what colour are we talking about when we're talking about flame? Generally, normal flames, we're talking about red, orange, yellow, carbon-based flames. So, is it not that? If it's a different colour, is it an abnormal sort of colour? That's probably going to dictate. There's probably something a lot different burning inside there. That's going to affect your risk assessment, particularly if we can see it from outside. What's inside that property. So, is it detached?
People can probably best understand that when they think about vehicle fires. When you see all of the many chemicals popping out of that bonnet and you see all the different flashes of colour, many of our electronics and components of bi-metals and all this sort of jazz that's going into so many of our devices today will give you a nice indication if it's not just carbon-based sofa, mattress, bed, whatever it might be. Is it the Xbox and all of the gaming stuff that's in the corner of the room that's flashing and popping and giving me all these little signs?
Yeah, I mean, is it detached as well? Is the flame sitting detached from the original fire source? Have you got flames in your smoke layer? And I think in a lot of people's cases as well, that might have been beforehand, again, training scars, that might have been people's cue to gas cool. I think I'll do it then because I saw it then when I did it in the container when I had this training, 10, 15 years ago, however long, but really, that should be, the gas cooling should come as a preventive measure to stop that happening in the first place. If you're seeing significant detached flames sort of appearing in overpressure and you are gas cooling, well, might be an indication to start going the opposite direction, rather than what you're doing, or certainly increase your weight of attack.
Never forget, and this is something that we've been teaching very recently, is never forget the fact that on most modern branches you do have that opportunity to go click, you've got more water. But that should be coupled with exactly what Lewis has just said there. Do I need to start withdrawing now to a slightly safer area? Any more on flame?
No, I think
it's a pretty simple element. It's the flame, to be honest. The flame is pretty simple. It's probably the smallest area for us to teach when you took into account everything else. And don't forget as well, BE-SAHF, they all feed into each other. It doesn't matter which one you're looking at, you will start talking about one of the other elements as well.
Because there's that cyclic aspect to it, isn't there? Same as the decision-making model. It goes, right, okay, you've done all of that. Now look back to the building. What has my actions affected the building? Has the environment changed? As a result of our actions, what's happened to the smoke? What's happened to the air and the ventilation profile? Is the increase in or decrease in heat? Is what I anticipated happening actually happening? Am I in control of that? What's that person that's gone around the side done to change my ventilation profile? People start opening doors and deploying from different entry points. Have I sectorized it, and what is my brief to the other sector, and how is what they're doing going to affect what I'm doing? Fellas, I've absolutely loved that. I think we've done well to discipline ourselves to keep it nice, tight and tactical. It's super useful. I'd love for us to find opportunities and maybe introduce some other members of the group if they want to come on and speak, because we've got some wealth of knowledge in there. You guys have consciously or unconsciously adopted that position. A lot of the guys and girls in there are looking to you to sort of step forward and lead on this, but there's some fantastic information on there. I'd love for us to maybe in a month or so's time think about something else that's come up in the group, something we keep circling back to. There's some fantastic documents and things that keep getting dropped in there. You're going to give me a couple of links. We're going to provide a link to, there's a 47-page document put together from over in the States. It's a research document around structural firefighting, and it's got the B-SAHF model in it. We'll make that available to people for free as well, so they can go there and have a bit more look on it. We're going to put in some links around stack effect. We're going to put some links around ventilation, and we're going to put a link in around Andy Starnes' YouTube and thermography. Is there anything you think we've missed, anything we want to circle back to, or any kind of closing points you want to leave in the ears of the listener?
No, I think good that you mentioned about Andy Starnes, to be fair. Whenever I talk about anything to do with ticks, I just rip off anything that Andy Starnes pretty much says.
Let's be fair, not just Andy Starnes. No. We were on a discussion earlier. We are not the cleverest person in the room, and we hear that quite often, but we really aren't. But what we do is we find out who is the clever person, find out their information and share it. We're basically middlemen, aren't we?
There's nothing original about us. No. In fact, I'm saying that's not even original, because I stole that off Jared Mann, when he said that, nothing original about what we do, just sort of
we're standing on the shoulders of giants. No one has original thought anymore. Everything is an amalgamation and just a sort of collective of all the things we've heard and seen before. And you guys say, I can certainly attribute to it. I think every single guest we have on the podcast is far more intelligent and knowledgeable than me. I've said it before, both Lewis, you and Dave would be able to run a far better podcast than me. But I think my naivety and also my tremendous absence, it's like that thing, isn't it? The more your knowledge and your sphere of influence grows, or the more people you speak to, the more you realize the infinitesimal starting point of your original knowledge. And you're like, oh dear, I had such confidence in the things I was saying 5 years ago in front of students. But no, that's it. We're all students with different levels of experience. Stolen again from, I think, John or Carol. But no, I've loved that today, fellas. Thank you so much for your time, and I really look forward to having you on again in the future.
Thanks, Pete. Thank you very much.
The Firefighters podcast was created to recognize, acknowledge, inspire, and hopefully even motivate these incredible individuals who have chosen to be part of the first responder community. Our driving purpose is to create a legacy resource for the current and future generations of firefighters and first responders. We get some incredible feedback from listeners and guests, and as the podcast grows, our desire to create longevity and sustainability means we are asking for the support of our listeners. If you want to support the podcast, if you want to get discounts to our merchandise, hoodies, clothing, coins, patches, tallies, and also access to all of the incredible documents get shared with us from our podcast guests and sector leaders, then please head over to our Patreon page, and for just £3 a month, you can support the future of the podcast. Please finally hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on the platform you're listening, and wherever you're in the world, please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.